It's been a whirlwind few days on the national political stage, with a former president dodging tragedy and also celebrating a legal triumph. To discuss that, as well as the latest city news, we're joined, as we are every month, by political expert and local government attorney Chris Hand. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning, Ann. How are you?
It's great. I'm glad that you were able to make your way downtown today with all of the road closures. And
It's almost like that movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles getting here today, Ann, but I'm glad to be here.
yeah,
Thank you.
I'm glad
Yeah.
that you were able to make it through. So let's start, if we can, with the latest in this failed assassination attempt over the weekend. There's some new information that we learned today. Law enforcement says they've been able to get into the assailant's cell phone, which is an important step, although they haven't said what they've found. The president appeared last night for the first time since the shooting at the RNC.
He did, and of course, there's still a multi-jurisdictional investigation going on into the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. They have identified the shooter, of course, Thomas Matthew Crooks, age 20, from a town about 30 to 40 miles from the rally site. What they don't seem to have yet is any real evidence of motive. They've discovered some about Mr. Crooks, how he accessed that particular roof, which apparently, according to some reporting yesterday, was actually being used as a staging area, that particular building, for local law enforcement during the site. There's also been some reporting that, spectators saw Mr. Crooks and tried to kind of issue warnings about the fact that he was accessing the roof. But all that's part of what is, again, is sort of an intense multi-jurisdictional investigation. Now, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is the lead investigatory agency here. Obviously, the United States Secret Service also involved. We heard President Biden say the other day that he was ordering an independent national review of the security provisions that were in place at the rally to determine more. And Congress has also said that it will exercise its oversight role and investigate this as well. So a very robust, again, multi-jurisdictional look at what happened in Butler.
And still, I think a very emotional and kind of, very shocking event for this nation and for his supporters, who, very much gave him a resounding ovation when he arrived with his ear bandaged at the convention last night.
Well, that's right, and as we've seen with with other assassination attempts in the past, for example, President Reagan in 1981, who had a bullet lodged an inch from his heart when he was there was an attempted assassination in Washington. Former President Trump barely dodged assassination. I mean, came very close to his head. So I think that was obviously a very concerning and alarming moment for so many reasons. And, I think in the aftermath of someone surviving something like that, there's a palpable sense of relief that obviously there was tragedy. There was a gentleman volunteer fire chief, who was killed there, others who were injured. So there was tragedy there. But in the case of the former president, narrowly dodged that attempt on his life. So there was a palpable sense of relief at the Republican National Convention last night when he arrived. And as you said, a very emotional entry for him into that particular arena as he started his journey, back to the general election.
And so that kind of was the headline from last night, almost surpassing the fact that he announced his his running mate, J.D. Vance. He's initially came to our attention as an author of Hillbilly Elegy, but has since gone on to have a career in politics as a senator in Ohio.
Well, that's right. And, there for, several weeks it had been speculated that the nomination process was really down to three people: Senator Vance, Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, and also Governor Doug Burgum from North Dakota. President Trump announcing yesterday afternoon that Senator Vance was his choice. And this is a choice that I think sometimes in past running mate selections, you see efforts to sort of balance the ticket or have, some ideological differences or that sort of thing. This is very much sort of a doubling down, someone who is very much has embraced former President Trump's philosophy and sort of his approach to politics, but with a much kind of younger generation. I mean, J.D. Vance is 39 years old. He's literally half the age that Donald Trump is. So this seems like an effort to perhaps pass the torch to set up the next generation of the Trump philosophy in government. But as you say, I mean, J.D. Vance first became known when he published Hillbilly Elegy, the story of his growing up in southern Ohio and kind of the Rust Belt, some of the challenges that he and his family faced. He served in the United States Marine Corps, went to Ohio State University, Yale Law School, was a venture capitalist, and then just ran for the Senate 2 years ago in 2022, was elected to the U.S. Senate from Ohio. So relatively new in terms of government experience in this situation, but I think was selected again for youth, someone who could be the next generation of the Trump philosophy, also someone who's from a strategic part of the country. From Ohio, the last several elections have been determined in the Rust Belt, and President Trump sort of acknowledged that in his statement yesterday when he mentioned all the states that he thought Senator Vance might be able to sort of relate to and help with. So I think it was a pick for those reasons, and I think ultimately probably was a pick because J.D. Vance has been so loyal and so aligned with Donald Trump, particularly over the last few years. Now, that's not always been the case. When Donald Trump first ran for president in 2016, J.D. Vance was quite critical, both publicly and privately, of the former president, but evolved and changed, and the two of them have now become very strong allies. So President Trump picking someone very much aligned with himself ideologically, but again, half his age, setting up sort of a next generation.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the big national, and we'll get to also the local news with attorney and government expert Chris Hand. He joins us each month to make sense of the headlines, and we could use his help for sure. So you can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We have a call from Mark on the north side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Attorney Marcus Barnett. I'm going to make 3 points as quickly as I can. First of all, it was hilarious to watch him play Marco Rubio. You know, he would never get Florida's electoral votes. He would be barred from having Florida's electoral votes if he picked Rubio. He was playing Rubio like he played Romney for Secretary of State. Number two, on the assassination, there's a number of extreme right-wing people around Bannon who think Trump is not right-wing enough, not fascist enough. They've made anti-Semitic comments regarding him, and they would love to have seen him out of the way. Watch for that development. Number three, you know, there's a independent investigation of the Secret Service. Congress is investigating. There's all these independent investigations going on of the shooting. How come we can't have that here in Jacksonville when there's a police shooting? Why do we rely on our police to investigate themselves when in an obvious case like this, we need somebody impartial? We'll never trust our police until there's independent oversight.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. I will start with the issue of Rubio because we were talking about that earlier. If he had been chosen as the VP candidate, what that would have meant and why he wouldn't have been able to take the electoral votes from Florida.
The reason it's an issue is the 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits electors from choosing a president and vice president from the same state. So if Donald Trump and Marco Rubio ran and both were Florida residents at the time the Electoral College meets in December, then theoretically that ticket would not have been able to win Florida's electoral votes. I suspect if he had been chosen, he probably would have resigned from the Senate after Election Day and established residency somewhere else prior to when the Electoral College meets, which isn't until sort of early to mid-December. But we'll never know that. Apparently that was one of the sort of hindrances to him being selected, that President Trump and his team just felt like there was kind of too much controversy about that particular issue. It is now being speculated that Senator Rubio could be a candidate for a cabinet position in a Trump administration. I think our colleague A.G. Gankarski has sort of reported or conjectured that one of those positions could be Secretary of State or other positions in the cabinet. So we'll obviously have to see how that unfolds over the next few months.
So there could be opportunities for Rubio if there was another Trump presidency.
Correct.
I want to ask you about this case, this decision, the federal court decision, basically throwing out the documents case against the former president. This is a shocking, I think, and some people consider a pretty dramatic development in that case. Explain to us the rationale that Judge Aileen Cannon used to reach her decision to end this case and what that means for it.
Well, just as a reminder, of course, former President Trump had been charged with 40 counts of withholding classified information and obstructing its return to the federal government after he left the office of president in January of 2021.
And these are the photos that everyone saw of kind of boxes in the bathrooms of Mar-a-Lago and other rooms.
Correct. These were classified documents, including, potentially, according to some of the reporting and the indictment, potentially some U.S. nuclear secrets and matters like that that had been removed from the White House and taken to Mar-a-Lago. At times, with past elected officials, there have been classified documents that have been removed from the White House, typically inadvertently. Their federal government requests that they be returned, and they are returned.
including President Biden when he
Including
was vice
President
president.
Biden. That's exactly right. Part of the issue here was that they asked they be returned, and some documents were not returned. Well, former President Trump was charged with these particular crimes. This was set in the Southern District of Florida. And yesterday, I think much to many people's surprise, the judge in that case dismissed the charges against former President Trump, saying that the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, who is overseeing this case, that his appointment was unconstitutional under the Appointments Clause of the United States Constitution, which requires the U.S. Senate to confirm officers of the United States, and under the Appropriations Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which says that Congress has to appropriate funding. I think this was a great surprise to many people for a couple of reasons. One, there's a long-standing practice of the U.S. Justice Department to appoint special prosecutors in cases that might be politically sensitive, and there's a good reason for that, to make sure they have not just actual independence, but also the appearance of independence in kind of being able to follow those cases wherever they might lead and prosecute them if that is the right decision to do that.
And remind us of some cases where it has been used.
Sure. Well, of course, I mean, I think one of the first ones was, under President Nixon when a special prosecutor was appointed to kind of look into the Watergate matter during the Iran-Contra affair. There was a special prosecutor just several years ago when former FBI Director Robert Mueller was appointed as a special prosecutor to look into links between the United States and Russia. This is a very common practice, and it's not just a practice. There is statutory authority in the United States Code which explicitly authorizes the Attorney General of the United States to appoint officials to prosecute cases of crimes against the United States. So, again, it's not just that it's a longstanding practice. There actually is statutory authority there. What it appears happened is when the presidential immunity case was handed down by the Supreme Court at the end of June, in Justice Clarence Thomas's concurrence to that opinion, he raised the question as to whether Special Prosecutor Smith had been properly appointed, citing these very issues that the judge in this documents case cited in her opinion. That resulted apparently in, this had been argued by former President Trump's lawyers. This was cited in her opinion and resulted in the dismissal yesterday. The Justice Department has already announced that it is immediately appealing that decision to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which oversees this particular area, and we'll see what the result of that is. But again, federal courts have weighed in on this issue many times in the past, always in support of the authority of the Justice Department to have a special prosecutor, particularly with that statute, particularly with this past practice. It seems very possible that the judge's decision will be overturned, but we just won't know that until it gets up to the 11th Circuit and, we hear what the oral argument there says and ultimately what those appellate judges decide.
How unusual is it for a judge to disregard a statutory provision and legal precedent?
I would say it's very unusual because, again, that is obviously what judges are charged to do, which is to apply the law. I haven't read every word of this particular opinion, so I want to reserve judgment until I do that, but I think that's part of the surprise here. This wasn't necessarily an area of law where there was a lot of sort of confusion, or it wasn't sort of a settled area. Again, there's both case law and statutory law, which sort of points toward a particular conclusion. Now, again, a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court sort of raised this issue in a concurring opinion. That is not a legal precedent in any sort, because I don't think he himself reached a conclusion on the subject in that opinion. But now this will have to be litigated at the appellate level as the Justice Department seeks to overturn that dismissal. If the appellate court does overturn the dismissal, the case goes back to the Southern District at that point. But obviously the judicial system and the legal system, they do not work quickly. So we're talking about a sort of a matter of months. This particular decision, I think, is unlikely to get resolved before the election.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to local government expert and attorney Chris Hand, and we are taking your calls and questions. We have a call from John in Riverside. Good morning, John. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. I wanted to say that the outer perimeter at this event was the responsibility of the local police department. There was one officer who saw the guy on the roof, tried to climb up on the roof. The guy pointed the rifle at him. He did what any reasonable person would do. He retreated to cover. If there had been two cops there, they could have had a standoff, but they couldn't shoot both of them at the same time. My question is, why weren't there two cops? And I believe it is because I heard last week on NPR that several municipalities were still trying to get security money from the Trump campaign for their security costs for his events. And that I believe it was this community that wasn't going to provide security unless he paid him for the last time he was there. It could be that an event that would normally be a basket of free overtime money and a bunch of little trinkets and things for participating in a presidential type event. The local police department did the very bare minimum because they knew they weren't going to get paid by Trump for their expenses, and a town that small can't afford to lay out tens of thousands of dollars for a billionaire running for office.
Thanks, John. Chris, it's my understanding that the towns that host events, election events that are where security is provided by the Secret Service, they are not necessarily paid for that. They kind of have to find the funding to do it.
I think it depends a lot on the circumstances, but yes, I mean, I think a standard part of this procedure is the Secret Service doesn't provide 100% of the security. They rely on local law enforcement to be an important part of that, particularly outside of that, that sort of inner perimeter. In that outer perimeter area, local law enforcement is usually very involved in that process. Now, as I understand it from some of the reporting we've seen in the initial investigation, the involvement of local law enforcement is usually part of the overall Secret Service plan. There's obviously closely coordinated. I don't think anyone disputes at this point that there was a major security breach that occurred in Butler, Pennsylvania. And a lot of these questions that were raised by the caller and by others, that's why these investigations are going to be so important by the different jurisdictions to figure out exactly what happened. How did a shooter access this roof with an AR-15 rifle with a direct line of sight to where former President Trump was speaking? Again, a major security breach, and I think the investigations will hopefully give the American people some understanding of how this happened and what measures are going to be put in place to make sure that doesn't happen again.
And to our earlier caller's question about police investigating police, I mean, in this case, there's a few parallel investigations that are happening at the same time. The FBI, as you say, is investigating. The Secret Service is also doing its own investigation. Is that removed enough from the people involved to be objective and fair?
Well, I think, and again, I also mentioned that Congress is investigating. I mean, it has oversight over all of these federal government executive branch agencies, including both the FBI and the Secret Service. So there's also a congressional investigation happening. So given the number of investigations that are occurring here, I think some people would kind of be concerned at times, is that too many investigations? Will they kind of step on each other? I actually think in a case like this, that's probably helpful that you have this matter being looked at from a variety of different perspectives so that at the end of the day, again, the most important goal here is to make sure the American public knows exactly what happened and, again, what steps need to be taken to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, Chris, with so much happening in the national headlines, it's almost hard to refocus, but very big news this week for the city of Jacksonville. Mayor Donna Deegan unveiling what is in many ways her first real budget of her own making, not one that she inherited because of the timing of taking office last July. So this is her budget. What does it look like?
Well, it's a significantly sized budget, although not as big as the city originally thought it might be. It's a general fund or an operating budget of $1.92 billion. The city showed about $73 million in new property tax revenue from last year. That's about $62 million less than they expected. But because of some changes in the real estate market and other factors, did not receive quite as much revenue as they wanted. I saw that, and there was some reporting about it was a tight budget year because they only had $73 million extra. It was a sort of a trip down memory lane to the 4 years I was at City Hall from 2011 to 2015, where 3 out of those 4 years we actually had less revenue than the year before, and the 1 year we had an increase. It was about $15 million.
So this
you know,
is a luxury
yeah,
compared to
right.
those
I mean, the
years.
city in a very different position than it was, not too long ago. But again, not as much revenue as they intended. And, as the mayor articulated in her budget address yesterday, a variety of priorities: infrastructure, affordable housing, addressing homelessness. She and the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office are working together on a prevention intervention program, which she's calling Journey Forward, sort of a next step in the Jacksonville journey, which had been in place in sort of 2008 and 2009. So, she outlined her priorities yesterday. Now we go, of course, to the city council. Under our charter here at the city of Jacksonville, the mayor simply proposes a budget. The authority to actually pass a budget and a millage rate, a property tax rate, under the charter belongs to the city council. So that process will now start. They'll have budget hearings in the month of August, and there'll certainly be some discussion about a number of issues then.
And this is the time of year where no one from the city council auditor is allowed to take off because they are just around the clock kind of crunching numbers and helping the city council digest this budget.
Well, that's exactly right. And by the way, for folks who aren't aware of it, that is one of the most crucial offices at the city of Jacksonville, the city council auditors. I tell people all the time that the sort of agency that I learned the most from when I was at the city were the city council auditors. These are professionals who have been with the city for many years, who really understand the city's budget and financial situation backwards and forwards. They're a real asset to the city council and the city in general. And I suspect they're going to be looking at a variety of issues in the budget. They do a very detailed report of each area of the budget, teeing it up. One will be the mayor in her budget proposal has proposed using $47 million of city reserves to help fund a variety of one-time expenses. That is a step that in the past councils and council auditors have been very skeptical. Obviously, the idea of having both a city reserve and an emergency reserve is to make sure that in the event some tragedy or natural disaster or other major unexpected event happens, that the city has money in its savings account, so to speak, that it can deal with those situations. So there's typically a lot of skepticism from council and the council auditors as to using money from reserves, particularly this amount of money from the reserves. Council Finance Chair, former President Ron Salem, has already signaled that he has some concerns about the use of these money from reserves, and so we'll have to see how that develops over the course of the budget hearing.
There is no American Rescue Plan money in this budget for the first time in many years. And as you say, ad valorem revenues less than expected. The mayor called this budget prioritizing the vital over the important. And so she does have to make some sacrifices in terms of her priorities. What stood out to you in terms of things that aren't being funded, perhaps at the level you would have thought they would be?
Sure. Probably. I mean, there were some areas that she clearly prioritized. There's $10 million for an affordable housing loan fund, $10 million for homelessness. I think one thing that was a bit of a surprise to some observers was the fact that, after the mayor had previously identified arts and culture as a priority of her administration, and in fact, in the budget address, talked about the 20-to-1 return on investment that arts and culture provides. I think what she said in her address is we're continuing our commitment to fund cultural council grants. Well, in fact, in the budget, the city is reducing its commitment to fund cultural council grants from just over $8 million last year to just under $7 million this year, so a cut of about $1.25 million. That sometimes happens in budgets, but I think what's particularly notable about this year, we talked about this the last time I was on the show, and you discussed it with some arts and culture leaders as well. Obviously, the governor vetoed $32 million out of the state budget that would have gone to arts and cultural organizations throughout the state. $2.6 million would have had an impact right here in Duval County, and of that $2.6 million, $2.1 million was going to organizations that receive cultural council grants each year. So that action at the state level, which takes away some money, and now a cut at the city level, which again takes away additional money from those arts and cultural organizations. I think that was one surprise in this budget that, again, particularly since it's mentioned in the budget address. Typically when mayors mention something in a budget address, that's because they want to highlight that and prioritize that or put it in some context, right? I mean, you've seen mayors in the past say, I care about X because of budget realities. We're having to make some adjustments this year. That wasn't particularly addressed in this budget address. And so, I'll be curious to see what the reaction is at City Council and among some of these arts and cultural organizations, particularly since now they're facing cuts at both the state and the local level in 2024.
We have an email from Mark. He says, as a registered Democrat, I've always believed my tax dollars should be spent to help people and not corporations. But in the name of downtown revitalization, we continue to dump good money after bad, and our property taxes continue to go through the roof along with our homeowners insurance. Hopefully, we are done trying to save the hideous Laura Street trio and the LERP sign, which is, of course, the sculpture that was proposed for the old landing site that says Jax theoretically, but kind of looks like LERP. So, the prioritizing of downtown in some eyes of some residents at the expense of other areas of town continues to be a point of friction.
Well, and it's such a point of friction, of course, that when he was president, Ron Salem appointed a special committee on the future of downtown and the future of the Downtown Investment Authority, the city agency, the independent authority that was created in 2012 to help oversee and revitalize downtown. And, what Mark has said, and just to reassure Mark, I think the LERP statue is now off the table, but the Laura Street trio is still being discussed. And, of course, three historic buildings, and for the last quarter century, the city and a variety of developers, most recently Steve Atkins of Southeast, have been trying to find a way to reach common ground to revitalize those three very historically significant buildings, which also are right in the core of downtown. I think part of the appeal of the Laura Street trio is its location, that it really would be downtown revitalization right in the heart of downtown. But that's now going back to city council as well. There's been a little bit of a ping pong match as that particular project has bounced from city council to the Downtown Investment Authority and back again. It's now back before city council to see if they can reach some sort of agreement. But I think that's a big discussion of this committee and has been in this community, which is, after years of trying with downtown revitalization, is the approach we're taking the right one? Is the agency we have set up to oversee these projects, is it constituted in the right way? I think you're going to see even more discussion about this as that special committee continues to meet.
In terms of the Laura Street trio, I mean, I guess it's worth saying, if restored properly, they would be really beautiful buildings. And the contention here is just that they've been vacant so long with kind of open windows and just not a great look.
Well, look, restoring historic buildings is not easy or inexpensive. But in communities that have managed to do that, and I think they do add a very significant component to a downtown area when they're able to do that. This has been a, long-running, I said, really kind of dates back to the beginning part of this century, if not sooner, the effort to try and revitalize these three buildings. Because it is not an easy project financially, there have been some hard discussions over time between the city and between, the developers who have tried to do this most for the last 10 years, Southeast developers, over how to do it. It looked like at one point a couple of months ago that the parties were on the verge of an agreement. There was some kind of positive back and forth in the media. It looks like they might be close to a deal. And then all of a sudden the Downtown Investment Authority said, sorry, we're not interested. We don't want to do a deal with you. We're pulling out of negotiations. This is up to you and the city council. So, one thing that I think is really important on that project in particular is the city needs to sort of make a decision about what it's going to do. If it does not, for some reason, want to reach a deal with the current developer, it should probably offer Southeast, the developer, a fair price and turn on to Plan B. I think what's not usually healthy for downtown is this continued situation of uncertainty, lack of resolution, being a little bit betwixt and between on what this is going to happen with this project.
But of course, I mean, the city did own those properties at one point, and nothing happened.
And gave them
And
away.
I don't think they want it again, do they?
Right,
Or?
they've bounced them around. Well, I don't think we know that for sure, but I think what doesn't help downtown revitalization is a continued sense of uncertainty. So hopefully what will occur as this project goes back to city council is finally some clarity and certainty as to what the future of that's going to be, whether that's the city partnering with the current developer to revitalize it, or whether the city deciding, again, to pay that developer a fair price and move on to another plan.
We've got a call from Benny on the north side. Good morning, Benny. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning.
I'm just, I was calling. I'm the president of Dinsmore Civic Association and also one of the curators of the Dinsmore Museum. And we haven't had AC in there in a month. and I can't seem to get much results from the guy Dan that spoke from Parks and Recreation, and I can't even get him to call me back and let me know what's going on about getting the AC fixed.
And we should be clear, that's a property that is owned by the city of Jacksonville.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's in the north side out in Dinsmore area,
Sure.
and it's the Dinsmore Historical Museum is what it's building is what it is, and but we haven't had AC there in about a month. We've had to cancel everything. We have a meeting there every Thursday night. We've been doing for over 8 years, and we have 60 to 80 people show up, and we've had to cancel everything.
Sorry to hear that, Benny. Thanks. I mean, there are so many needs, Chris Hand, in terms of, resources for the city. And I don't think it's terribly surprising that some city properties are running into that, lack of investment. Certainly, it's a bad time of year to be losing AC.
It really is. This is the worst possible time to not have AC. And just to say to our caller, if you have not already, please do reach out to your district council person. And, of course, each of us at the city are represented directly by 6 members of council, our district council person and 5 at-large members. Please reach out to them and make sure they're aware of this challenge so they can contact the Parks Department. You may also want to call the mayor's office directly to make sure they're aware of this as well. And as you say, we've got a lot of city buildings that many of which are, decades old, require maintenance. And the mayor has invested a significant amount of money in the budget through the capital improvements program to help maintain and improve some of these buildings. But it's a kind of a never-ending battle for the city to do that. I think if anyone's in a city building and experiencing those kind of problems, please make sure to contact your council members and the mayor's office to alert them so they can make sure whichever city department, whether it's Parks or Public Works, oversees that particular building, that they can take action, because this is, as Ann said, this is not a time of year anyone wants to go without air conditioning.
She has worked to, resolve issues that were happening at the public pools. So many of them closed due to lack of maintenance, lack of proper staffing, and that really has been, I think, a victory lap that she's tried to run, because dedicated funding, is helping to alleviate that problem.
With good reason. I mean, that her administration, should feel good about the work that they've done as it relates to public pools. Again, something that we understand the importance even more this time of year than at other times of year. That's always been a priority. When Jay Godbold was mayor, it was a major priority of his to make sure there were public pools at each of the high schools in Jacksonville, so that families did have access to pools around the community. And Mayor Deegan and her team have also made a priority of trying to make sure those pools are in good working order and available for people in the community to use.
Just briefly, Chris, we talk about this budget, $1.92 billion, but in reality, there's a lot of other sources of funding that come to the city. Explain to us overall how much this budget, how much the city really has at hand.
Well, it's a complicated question because there's really kind of two, the way I like to explain it, there's really 2 tranches of the budget I think that people sort of ought to pay attention to. One is what we talked about primarily this morning, the operating budget, the general fund, which is $1.92 billion. And that has sources of money from a lot of places. Ad valorem or property taxes, shared sales taxes from the state. We get a franchise fee from JEA, use taxes. So there's a variety of different revenue types, grants. As you say, during and after immediate aftermath of the pandemic, the American Rescue Plan, there were dollars that came in from the federal government. That's the operational side. The other budget that people pay attention to a lot is what's called the capital budget, or the capital improvements program, which this year is just under $500 million, $489 million. That's to fund the city's infrastructure projects. A lot of that is done through borrowing, the city borrowing money to fund these kind of longer-term infrastructure projects. Sometimes they're called what's PAYGO. They use cash the city has on hand to pay for those. But that's a big deal for every mayor as well. And the last several mayors have prioritized infrastructure. That was a big priority of Mayor Curry's. It's also been a big priority of Mayor Deegan. She's talked about that in the campaign, in both of her budget addresses. And again, a CIP that's almost $500 million, that is a significant investment in infrastructure.
Well, Chris Hand, it is always a delight to have you here, and we so appreciate all your good insights and helping us understand the news of the day. Thanks for doing it.
And great to see you. I'll see you in August.
Yeah, we'll see you back in just a month.